Donald Trump has declared war on the Federal Aviation Administration, accusing the agency of stifling American innovation and sabotaging the private space industry. This move comes as no surprise to those who have closely followed the increasing tensions between the FAA and SpaceX. This initiative, led by Musk through the newly established Department of Government Efficiency, aims to streamline operations and reduce what they perceive as bureaucratic inefficiencies within the FAA. The FAA has been a major obstacle for private space companies, especially SpaceX, due to its strict regulatory framework. Many argue that instead of helping innovation, the FAA has caused unnecessary delays and setbacks for companies trying to advance spaceflight technology. This problem has existed for years, but it became particularly frustrating for SpaceX during the development and testing of Starship, the company's next-generation rocket designed for missions to the Moon and Mars. One of the biggest issues has been the repeated delays imposed on Starship test launches. In early 2021, SpaceX was prepared for a high-altitude test flight, but the FAA refused to grant approval on time. This forced SpaceX to postpone the launch multiple times, even though the company had successfully conducted similar flights in the past. The delays weren't limited to just a few weeks. Regulatory reviews stretched out for months, slowing down Starship's development and causing setbacks for both SpaceX and NASA's Artemis program, which relies on Starship as its human landing system. Another major hurdle came when the FAA required an environmental impact statement for SpaceX's launch site in Boca Chica, Texas. This review process, which normally takes a few months, dragged on for over a year. While environmental concerns are important, many experts argued that the FAA was applying excessive scrutiny to SpaceX while being far more lenient with other aerospace companies. These delays prevented Starship from moving forward at the speed SpaceX wanted, impacting its ability to improve the rocket through rapid testing and iteration. In 2023, when SpaceX was finally ready for the first fully integrated Starship and Super Heavy booster launch, the FAA once again held back approval. Although SpaceX had met technical requirements and was prepared for launch, the FAA imposed last-minute regulatory conditions, causing further delays. Eventually, the rocket was allowed to launch, but when it exploded shortly after liftoff, the FAA conducted a lengthy investigation that grounded the program for several more months. This slow approval process and extended grounding periods have been a consistent issue, making it difficult for SpaceX to follow its preferred approach of quickly testing. Beyond delays, the FAA has also fined SpaceX for alleged regulatory violations. One of the most controversial fines was issued when SpaceX proceeded with a Starship test flight, despite not having final FAA approval. The company had followed all standard safety procedures, and there were no public safety incidents, but the FAA still imposed a fine. Many saw this as an unfair punishment and an example of the agency's inconsistent enforcement of rules. Critics argue that the FAA has been excessively strict with SpaceX, while being far more lenient with traditional aerospace companies and government programs. These ongoing conflicts between SpaceX and the FAA have had consequences beyond just one company. NASA's Artemis program, which aims to return humans to the Moon, has been affected because it depends on Starship for landing astronauts. With Starship facing constant delays due to regulatory issues, Artemis missions have been pushed back as well. Meanwhile, countries like China, which do not have the same bureaucratic hurdles, continue advancing their space programs at a faster pace. Musk has openly criticized the FAA multiple times, calling its regulatory process outdated and too slow for modern spaceflight. He has argued that the FAA treats space launches the same way it regulates commercial air travel, which is not an effective approach given the differences between the two industries. According to Musk, if SpaceX had been allowed to move faster without unnecessary regulations, Starship could have already been launching operational missions. When Donald Trump returned to office in 2025, he quickly took action against the FAA, seeing it as an example of government overreach slowing down American innovation. He and Musk had previously disagreed on various political issues, but they found common ground in their shared frustration with excessive regulations. Trump's administration made a bold move by dismissing hundreds of FAA safety officials, aiming to speed up decision-making and reduce unnecessary delays. This decision was controversial. Supporters of the move argued that the FAA had been too slow and bureaucratic, making it difficult for private space companies to compete on a global scale. They believed that reducing the agency's power would allow faster development of new space technologies, making the U.S. more competitive. On the other hand, critics warned that firing so many officials at once could create safety risks. They argued that while the FAA had its flaws, completely removing its oversight could lead to rushed decisions and potential accidents. Trump's administration is also considering transferring space launch regulations away from the FAA entirely. Instead, a new agency focused specifically on spaceflight might be created, or the National Space Council could take over regulatory responsibilities. The goal would be to create a system that supports innovation while still maintaining safety standards. To fill the operational void left by these dismissals, engineers from SpaceX have been deployed to the FAA's Air Traffic Control System Command Center in Virginia. Their mandate is to modernize the aging air traffic control infrastructure, leveraging SpaceX's technological expertise to implement advanced systems aimed at improving efficiency and safety. Despite these controversies, Musk and Trump expressed mutual admiration and a shared vision for reducing governmental waste and fostering innovation. Musk has articulated his commitment to eliminating inefficiencies, projecting a reduction in the federal deficit by $3 trillion through the eradication of fraud and unnecessary expenditures. Musk has been heavily involved in both politics and the continued development of SpaceX's Starship program. While engaging in government restructuring efforts and political discussions, he is also overseeing the preparation for Starship Flight 8, which is expected to launch by the end of February 2025. This mission is a critical step toward achieving full reusability for deep space missions, including planned flights to the Moon and Mars. Despite his political commitments, Musk has ensured that progress on Starship continues at a steady pace, working closely with engineers and regulators to finalize the upcoming launch. SpaceX has been preparing for this mission using Ship 34 and Booster 15, both of which have undergone extensive testing at the company's launch site in Texas. Engine test campaigns for the Super Heavy booster and the Starship upper stage have been completed successfully. The upcoming flight is expected to include a demonstration of the ability to deploy Starlink satellites, a maneuver that is crucial for proving the spacecraft's operational capabilities. The mission will conclude with a controlled descent and splashdown in the Indian Ocean. The focus of this launch is to further test the spacecraft's structural integrity and evaluate improvements made since the last test flight. The Federal Aviation Administration has provided updated advisories indicating that launch windows for Starship Flight 8 will begin on February 26, 2025, with additional backup dates extending into early March if necessary. These regulatory notices suggest that SpaceX is on track to receive the necessary approvals to proceed with the launch on schedule. However, before the flight can take place, the Federal Aviation Administration must complete its ongoing investigation into the previous Starship test flight, which experienced technical issues that required further review. The investigation is being conducted with oversight from the National Transportation Safety Board, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the United States Space Force. These agencies are working to ensure that SpaceX has implemented the necessary corrective actions before granting final approval for the next launch. Musk has been actively involved in efforts to reform government agencies, which has included significant changes to the Federal Aviation Administration's regulatory authority over spaceflight. His influence has led to the removal of hundreds of officials from the agency, with the goal of reducing bureaucratic delays that have historically slowed down the approval process for private spaceflight companies. These changes have been controversial, with critics arguing that cutting staff could lead to safety risks, while supporters claim that the government has been too slow in adapting regulations to match the rapid advancements in space technology. While managing these political efforts, Musk has remained committed to ensuring that SpaceX continues to push forward with its ambitious plans. He has spent considerable time at the company's Texas facilities, working with engineers to finalize preparations for Starship Flight 8. The goal of this flight is to refine the vehicle's flight systems, improve its reusability, and test key components needed for long-duration space missions. That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching, and be sure to stay tuned for more updates on SpaceX and Starship.